Good day, everyone. I am Donalyn Miumhiu, and I'm going to report about literary elements of art. Folk literature, also called folklore or oral tradition. Folk, which means regional people, the lore, traditional knowledge, and beliefs of cultures having no written language. It is transmitted by word of mouth and consists, as does written literature, of both prose, verse, narratives, poems and songs, myths, dramas, rituals, proverbs, riddles, and the like. Nearly all known peoples now or in the past have produced it. Therefore, folklore reflects told by the people in a particular region. Oral tradition are the stories that were told verbally. Each generation would then tell their own children, and these stories became part of the children's tradition. Types of folklore. There are many ways for culture to express their beliefs through folklore. Some population use song and dance to tell stories, while others tell larger than the life stories about mythical heroes. The first example of type folklore is the fables and folktales. These folktales typically involve a person or animal learning a valuable lesson by obeying or, in most cases, not obeying cultural rules. Example of this is the ant and the grasshopper, one of the Aesop fables about the grasshoppers who plays all the summer in the ant to prepare for the hard time ahead. Fairy tales are folk tales that include elements of fantasy stories such as royalty and magic. Example of this is Cinderella. This is a fairy tale about a servant who becomes a princess, and it is because of a little magic and true love. Cinderella was first published in France by Charles Perrault. Other examples are The Little Mermaid, Rapunzel, Snow White, and many more. Mythology. They range from the stories about Greek god, French, which is Percule tales, and American tale tales. You'll typically find legendary characters doing extraordinary things in this type of folktales. Example of mythology is Prometheus Tales the Fire. This is a Greek myth that depicts how the trickster titan Prometheus stole the fire from the gods for human beings. Folk songs. Our cultures often put their stories from folklore to traditional music. They range from everyday stories of common folk to heroic tales told in ballad form. One of the example here in Philippine folk song is the Mamang Sorbetero. Folk dance. If you ever been to a cultural festival or wedding, you've probably seen a folk dance. They are traditional dances taught to each new generation in a specific culture. These dances often require a large group of people and are performed at community and gatherings and special events. Here in the Philippines, we have Cariñosa. Proverbs, also meant to guide the behavior within a culture. Some culture use proverbs as adages or maxim. Proverbs are one or two sentence expression that reinforce a society, morals, and belief. Example of this is the pen is mightier than the swords. This is an English proverbs about oppression. Folk arts. Arts that are created in a traditional medium by ordinary people is folk art. Folk arts artists are not professionally trained, but instead rely on traditions passed down by artists before them. The items they created can be displayed as artwork or used for everyday purposes. Poetry. Poetry is a literature that evokes a concentrated imaginative awareness of experience or a specific emotional response through language chosen and arranged for its meaning, sound, and rhythm. Elements of poetry. First is the stanza. Stanza are basically the poetic equivalent of a prose paragraph. They are a series of lines that are grouped together and separated from other group of lines or stanzas by a skip line. A couplet composed of two lines, tercet, three lines, quatrain or four lines, cinquain is five lines, and sestet consists of six lines. Poem structures, type of poetry, and their characteristic. Lyric poetry concerns itself largely with the emotional life of the poet. That is, it's written in their voice and expresses strong thoughts and emotion. The second is the narrative poetry. As its name implies, narrative poetry is concerned storytelling. A narrative poem will most likely to follow the convention of plot including elements of conflict, rising action, climax, and resolution. Example of narrative poetry is the story of a person. You narrate it, you narrate it from the beginning and to end. Descriptive poetry usually employs lots of imagery to describe the world around the poet, while it most often has a single poetic voice and a strong emotional content. Descriptive poetry differs from lyric poetry in that its focus is more on the externalities of the world rather than the interior life of the poet. Subtypes of poetry. Sonnets are predominantly concerned with matters of the heart. There are two common forms of sonnet, the Shakespearean and the Petrarchan. They differ slightly in their internal structure, but both have 14 lines. Shakespearean's comprises 3 quatrains and 4 of each lines. Ends with a rhyming couplet which forms a conclusion. Rhyme scheme is AB AB, CD CD, EF EF, and GG. Petrarchan comprises 2 stanzas. First 8 line poses a question and the second stanza answers the question posed. Rhyme scheme is ABBA, CDE, CDE. Haiku. Haiku is a discipline form of poetry that has its origin in 17th century in Japanese poetry, usually concerned with nature and natural phenomena such as the seasons, weather, etc. They are often quite meditative in tone. Elegy are the type of poem that don't really come with specific structural requirements but still constitute a recognizable form of poetry. What makes an elegy is its subject, that is death. The word elegy itself comes from a Greek word elegia which means to lament. Most of the poem is about grief and sorrows. Limerick is the most defining characteristic of limericks are their own renowned humor, given their well-deserved reputation for being funny on occasion. Crude, it's easy to overlook the fact that beneath the loves lie quiet, a tightly structured verse form. Ballads are a type of narrative poetry that has close ties to musical forms. Ballads written as poetry can often easily be adapted as song lyrics. Ode is another poetry form that traces its origin to ancient Greece. Odes were originally intended to be sung. Nowadays, though no longer be sung. The term ode still refers to a type of lyrical poem that addresses and often praises a certain person, thing, or event. Epic. These are long narrative poems that recount heroic tales, usually focus on a legendary or mythical figure. Think of works of literature on a grand scale such as the Odyssey, the Castle Raid of Coley, or Beowulf. Sound devices. Alliteration. This device involves the repetition of the initial consonant sound of a series of words, often consecutively. Alliteration is most easily explained to students through looking at few simple tongue twisters such as Peter Piper or She Sells Seashells. Assonance. Similarly to alliteration, assonance involve the repetition of sounds in a series of words, often consecutive words. However, rather than repeating the initial sounds, assonance focuses on the internal vowel sounds that are repeated. Consonance is the consonant-focused counterpart to assonance. It involves the repetition of consonant sounds in the middle or at the end of words. as distinguished from the alliteration where the initial sound is repeated. Onomatopoeia refers to the process of creating words that sound like the very thing they refer to. For many students, the first introduction to onomatopoeia goes back to learning animal sound as an infant. Words such as oink, chirp, woof, and meow can all be thought as onomatopic. Rhyme refers to the repetition of sounds in a poem. Various types of rhyme are possible, however, in English, we usually use the term rhyme to refer to the repetition of the final sounds in a line or end rhyme. Letters are often used to denote a rhyme scheme. A new letter is ascribed to each of the different sounds. For example, in the following example of the rhyme scheme is described as ABAB. Rhythm in poetry involves sound patterning. A lot of classical poetry confirms to us systematic regularity of rhythm, which is referred to as the poem's meter. This involves the combining of stressed and unstressed syllables to create a constant beat pattern that runs throughout the poem. Each pattern of beats is called a foot. There are various possible combinations of stressed and unstressed syllables or feet, and these patterns have their own names to describe them. While it is impossible to explore all of this in this article, we take a look at one of the more common ones. Metaphors make a comparison between things by stating that one thing literally is something else. Metaphors are used to bring clarity to ideas by forming connections. Often, metaphors reveal implicit similarities between figure of speech. Alliteration is the repetition of the beginning sounds of neighboring words, such as she sells seashells. Assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds, not just letter, in words that are close together. The sounds don't have to be at the beginning of the word. A for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore by Poe. E. Therefore, all seasons shall we be sweet to thee by Coleridge. I. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire by Frost. Oh, oh, hear old Triton blow his wreathen horn by Wordsworth. U. Uncertain rustling of each proper curtain by Poe. Hyperbole uses exaggeration for emphasis or effect. I've told you to stop 1,000 times. Irony occurs when there's a marked contrast between what is said and what is meant, or between appearance and the reality. The Titanic was said to be unsinkable but sank on its first voyage. Situational voyage. Metaphor. A metaphor makes a comparison between two unlike things or ideas. Heart of stone. Onomatopoeia is the term for a word that sounds like what it is describing. Example, whoosh, buzz, puff. Oxymoron is two contradictory terms used together. Example is peace force. Personification gives human qualities to non-living or ideas. Example is the flowers nodded. Simile is a comparison between two unlike things using the words like or as slippery as an eel. Synecdoche occurs when a part is represented by the whole, or conversely, the whole is represented by the part. Wheels, a car.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yukame Nagmata. My report is all about a short story and a novel, and also the elements of short story, novel, and a point of view. A short story has main character, and the story is told through the character point of view. Short work of fiction, which means na product of imagination sa writer. So, kanina short story is more on about prose poetry, which means na ordinary kind of writing.